Hello, everyone. Honorable Minister, colleagues at the high table, thank you for having me here. My name is Frédéric Perron-Welch. I'll be presenting a case that we did with the CRFM, which is the National Fishermen's Cooperative Society in Belize, where we've done a carbon footprint of their Caribbean spiny lobster fishery. Green Initiative worked with the CRFM to assess the carbon footprint of the National Fishermen's Cooperative Society in Belize. The objective was to help them begin internalizing international climate action best practices in their spiny lobster value chain through first footprint assessment, second mitigation recommendations, and third, ideally, a climate certification through Green Initiative. The NFCS has over 500 cooperative members who deliver their artisanal catches to the cooperative's plant for processing, freezing, and boxing. These harvests are essentially quite close to the shore in the shallow waters of Barrier Reef and offshore atolls in Belize. And the fishermen largely use either wooden sailboats or fiberglass skiffs. And although some of the product is consumed in Belize, the majority is exported to the United States and Asia. This is an overview of the footprinting process. So we first began by defining the scope of the work, by essentially establishing which emission sources we'd be looking at based on the organization's operations and the data that they had available. We then designed our calculation tool, so essentially identifying those sources and collecting information. Once we collected the information, we then validated the technical consistency of that information, and subsequently we obtained and analyzed these initial results to prepare a detailed carbon footprint report. As you'll see here, there's an overview of the types of emission sources that we were looking at. So they're broken up into 3 different categories. Scope 1 are essentially the internal emissions that can be found within the company. Scope 2 are emissions related to electricity consumption and generation, while Scope 3 are essentially outside of the operations of the company, but are emissions that are linked to generating its products. So whether business travel, commuting, transporting raw materials, some of the emissions for producing fuels, paper consumption, so for the cardboard boxes that the cooperative uses, and methane from decomposition of solid waste. We generated the carbon footprint. We were able to determine that the cooperative had just under 800 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year in terms of emissions, which is actually quite a low amount. It's distributed between the 3 scopes that I just mentioned. The highest emissions were actually from Scope 2, which are from electricity generation. And this isn't necessarily that surprising because in the Caribbean and the Central American region, a lot of the power is fossil fuel generated. And the fishermen, because they're using artisanal methods, are really not necessarily generating that much of a carbon footprint. We then broke it down according to those 15 sources that we had earlier. And as you'll see here, electricity consumption by the production plant is actually the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And you also have the 4th largest is losses in transmission and distribution. So there's actually quite a significant opportunity there in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of the fisheries if we just look at improving that electricity generation, whether through buying solar panels for their operations or finding a specialist producer of cleaner electricity. We then have quite a lot of fuel consumption by mobile sources, and this will be essentially for those two-stroke or four-stroke engines that we were talking about. And there are some opportunities there as well, given that we are looking at the use of quite a lot of two-stroke engines that could be upgraded in different ways. Using the carbon footprint, what we were able to do is create a core indicator, which is the amount of kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilo of product. And we were able to establish that based on the harvest, that there's an indicator of just under 3 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilo of product. And we, in our research, were able to find that some fisheries, especially ones that are reliant on being at sea much longer, have up to 10 times the carbon emissions of this fishery. So given that the fishery is quite close to shore and traditional methods are being used, it's actually a very low carbon fishery as it is, which makes it a bit challenging in terms of decarbonizing further, but we were then able to develop some recommendations on that as well. The first recommendation is a fairly standard one, which is to develop a climate policy. And as part of that policy, to develop a climate action plan for the next 6 years. So going to 2030, where there's an international goal of reducing emissions by 50% by 2030. We then would help them establish corporate reduction targets that are specific to particular aspects of their operations. Making sure that they track results on an annual basis and demonstrate those results through our online platform. We proposed that they further communicate their progress at both national and international levels and implement those decarbonization actions that we've established through the action plan and the corporate reduction targets. One critical issue is to essentially enhance data collection so that in further rounds of footprinting and certification, that the organization itself has largely done the data collection, and that it's more a question of validation rather than having to go all the way back through the entire process again and recreating a footprint. As I mentioned, one key recommendation was to try to transition to clean energy sources. And that's either by investing in your own infrastructure, for example, by buying solar panels to supply electricity directly to the factory, or to purchase clean energy from specialized providers if that's an opportunity. There's also the need to explore cleaner energy sources for fishing vessels on a case-by-case basis. One way in which to do this is to increase the efficiency of the engines, which would be moving from a two-stroke to a four-stroke engine. That will inherently reduce your emissions because you're burning less fuel. But there may also be opportunities, for example, to use biofuel, which would then have a lower carbon footprint than fossil fuels, or gradually move towards electric propulsors, if that's a possibility, although that will be certainly more expensive. And of course, importantly, reinforcing communications on climate actions with clients and partners, because that helps to further enhance the fisheries' competitiveness and visibility in global value chains that are looking for low carbon sources of fisheries products. And with that, I'd like to conclude, and thank you very much.